Welcome to teleSUR English. We go now live to the Vatican City as news come from the Sistine Chapel as a new Pope has been elected. We see white smoke coming out of the Sistine Chapel.
Just scared away our seagulls there, the little family there that was just relaxing on.
We are looking at images
But actually, as you mentioned at the beginning, TJ, it seemed like they did not.
from the Sistine Chapel.
Indeed. In fact, maybe they were giving us a kind of a secret, a bit of information that they knew that we didn't know. But here we are.
We are looking at images at this moment.
Sunny, brilliant evening here, and
Sistine
you can even see from,
Chapel
the
shows
perspective of the
white
crowds
smoke
there in
coming
St. Peter's
out
Square, the white smoke billowing
as a
from the
new
chimney,
Pope
even
has
as the
been
sun starts going
elected.
down behind the dome of St. Peter's there.
Of course, the news
And this smoke will
will
last
be
at least
confirmed
about 6
as
minutes, 6 and a
the
half
Church
minutes.
confirms who is the candidate that has been elected for leading the Catholic Church.
We've got now basically about it's going to be
We are
45
looking
minutes
at
to
images
least
at
an
this
hour at
moment.
least
Let's
before
recall that the
the
conclave
Pope
started
just elected.
on
So here's
Wednesday,
to
and just in
greet
this
everyone.
second day,
And, so there's huge anticipation.
during the fifth round of voting, we see white smoke come out of the Sistine Chapel.
Well, and I mean, as we were talking about before, you see the crowds.
This
filling
signals
the
that
squares, but also
an agreement
the
has been
different
reached.
people who have come. I mean, you
Two-thirds
can see
of
flags
the
waving,
cardinals have
people
voted
smiling.
on
It's a big sign
one
of the universality of the church, but then also
Pope designate, and
how supportive
this
people
means
are in
that
sense
the
of being here for
Catholic
this moment.
Church has a new leader.
And now we're
We
gonna
do
have
not
an
know
invasion of
still the
Romans.
name
They're gonna be
of that
coming in.
leader. It will be
No,
confirmed
it's
briefly
only natural and normal. I
and
mean,
shortly through the Vatican mechanisms, but at this time, the only and official way of showing the importance of this moment, that white smoke has announced that a new Pope has been elected, a new leader of the Catholic Church. Let's recall that the conclave started just one day ago. We are looking at images from St. Peter's Square.
There you go.
So there you are.
They were just
Many
there.
Stop the
were gathered. Thousands of pilgrims, of faithful from across the world were gathered at the square waiting for the signal.
All the different flags.
And right now, after hours of waiting, when people and experts were ready to wait for
right around the corner here, and her closest friend was
a couple more hours,
and they went running out.
white smoke has finally said that a new Pope has been elected. Let's recall that the main topic of
Oh
discussion,
my goodness.
as we see the great amount of
You just
white
never
smoke
know. I
coming
mean,
out
when I was
of
in
that
Square, people thought,
iconic
"Oh, no, it might be a longer
Sistine
time.
Chapel
It could take,
chimney.
days. You just don't know.
We are
You just don't
looking
know.
You
at
just don't know. In fact,
that definite
uh,
signal
I
that the
didn't know what to
conclave
expect.
has
At the same
achieved
time,
the
it's a
two-thirds
wonderful
majority. This is the
surprise to see
largest conclave, 133 cardinals electing an authority for the Catholic Church.
Confidence.
And indeed, this
So
hope that's being
the
realized
white
that we have
smoke
a
is a
new,
definite signal.
shepherd, so to
The
speak,
Catholic Church
someone
has
to,
a new leader.
uh,
What
take
we are
on the reins
awaiting
there
now
and
to see
accompany us on this journey of our life
is
journey. And,
for the Vatican authorities
and
to
then it will be fascinating to see, as I
communicate
say, you
the
see
name
central
of
lodge
the
St. Peter's
designated
Basilica, you
cardinal
see,
that from
that's
today
where the
on
new
will
Pope be
take a
appearing,
new
as he
name
traditionally does, to
that will
be announced.
give
The
him the
Habemus
new
Papam.
identity
We
as
have a Pope,
the
and,
leader of the Church.
then the
We
big surprise will
reiterate,
be as
breaking
he
news
proceeds
is that the
towards
Catholic Church
central
has
lodge, we can
chosen
see who that
a successor for late Pope Francis.
cardinal is, now dressed in
There was true uncertainty
For
about how
many people,
long
they might
this
be thinking, okay,
conclave
why is
was
there
going
this
to
long wait, as
last.
you mentioned,
Among the main
why is
topics
there this
and
long wait
debate
in between
had to
when we see
do
the white
with the
smoke and when the new Pope
continuity
comes out to the
or
loggia?
change
It's because
regarding
there's a
the
process that's going on
reforms
right now.
that
There is a
Pope
very long
Francis
process which will
had
be the
brought
oath
to
of
the Church.
allegiance,
And
of
those
the
were
cardinals,
among the
of which
key
there are
debates
132
regarding
now.
who
And
would
we
lead the
saw how
Church
long it
at
took
this
for the oath
difficult
to,
and challenging
be
times
for
of the
oath
world
to the
scene.
conclave.
Well, we will have
I'm
a
imagining
definite
it will take
answer
about that length, for
on
the, oath of
how
allegiance.
that
Well, and also Liz had
discussion
mentioned
played
before,
when we
way
know
before in our
who was
discussion, the Room
the
of Tears, which has become
cardinal
very central
that
right now
managed to
after-
obtain
it's- so
two-thirds
right now, the
majority,
Pope, the
as
new
we
Pope, would
see
have gone-
the
or
bells
was-
on
is
the
it
si-
after
I would think
on
I
the
would think
St.
that the
Peter's
ballots
Basilica
happened after. I think he's
ringing
already, and I think that's one of
an
the reasons why this was
announcement
kind of a funny hour.
Right.
of the new election
As it got to be
that the
past
cardinals
5, I was thinking,
had
well, I
reached.
guess
Let's
now we
recall
have to wait until 7. But I
that
think,
after the
this
conclave
must have
started
been the
on
time that
Wednesday
he
with the
spent
black
in that
smoke,
room
we
of
also
tears
saw
thinking
black smoke
about
on
preparing
Thursday
himself for
morning.
what is look at that square.
And
I mean, that
at
square
this
is just- it's a
afternoon session of
microcosm
voting,
of the millions,
so
if not
only on its
billions,
second
who are
day,
watching, all of them fixed
the
to see
conclave,
some of them
the
already
133
Christians,
cardinals
Catholics, but other people who are really searching, and there is so much searching
have
going
reached
on in
a
the world.
decision.
I don't know how many of the people
This
that I've been working
moment
with in the secular
will
media
mark
circles who talk,
possibly
"Oh, I
the
used to be
coming
Catholic, I went to
decades
Catholic school, or I was an altar boy, or I
for
was
the
this."
church, but also for the world,
They
as
somehow feel this
the head
moment
of the
is
Catholic
still
Church
their own. It's a funny thing about those sacraments,
is
right, Father? It's
among
like,
the
I can't
main
write it up.
leaders
And
and will
so
be in the
he's
tables
also
of
the
discussion
father
regarding
to those
the
boys
most
and to
important
all the
topics
others who don't even know that
that
they're orphaned yet. So
humanity and the world is
Exactly.
facing. Let's
And
recall
there's
that
also a
during
real life need
his
going on in the
papacy,
volunteers as well, because
Pope
probably the
Francis
tailors
has
were very
intervened
busy
in key
adjusting
areas
one of
such
those,
as
cassocks to be
ongoing
able
wars.
for the new
He
pope
has
to be
been
able to wear
very
out the
critical
religion.
of
Oh,
the
and don't forget
ongoing
the barber.
genocide
They
in
keep the barber
Palestine,
back
for
there just in
example.
case
He
he
has
needs, like, a
also
shave in the
been
trim or
one of
something,
the
'cause, like, some of them
strongest
show up happy for
voices
the conclave,
in
they're not
favor
expecting it, so apparently they've got a barber back
of
there.
governments considering
Also, sorry to
climate
see.
change and the need to shape
these
the
are
economies of the
incredible
world
moments,
to
aren't they,
take into account that
and what a
climate
surprise you're
change
sending out
is
that
a
report
very
on looking at history, and
real
here we are, the smoke
hazard for
billowing
many
out,
nations
and,
across the world.
and here we are,
Also,
waiting
a
now
voice for
to
the
see
most
who
humble
the
and,
new
of course,
pope
a
will be.
perspective
Well, and as
from
you
the
mentioned,
global
TJ,
south
this is,
on
that
such
was-
a
we had
leading
just heard in
institution.
that
Now,
archived interview, I
whoever
remember
has
where
been
I
elected
was when,
at this
Roncalli
moment
was
to
elected,
continue
and now we
that
all
role
remember where we were
will
at
have
that
the
moment when
chance
this new pope
to
was elected,
intervene
and
in
we
these
would have been here
topics,
seeing these flags from South
will
Korea,
become
from
one of the
Spain,
most
from
influential
everywhere, from
heads of
Serbia, no,
state.
from Croatia.
And whoever
it's
has
amazing
been
to
chosen
see.
at this moment will have a decisive voice
I'm one of
on
those
this
that
matter.
actually
So we
saw
were saying
Papa
that
Roncalli
among
here in Rome,
the
in
key
general
topics
audience, yes.
of discussion
Came, as a child and,
were the
took part
possibility
in
of
events, and there he was
choosing
being carried in on the
a
same
cardinal
Constitution,
that would
and he
represent
really
the
was
continuity
smiling,
of these
good Pope
reforms,
John. I mean, he was just so warm
or a
and
cardinal from a more conservative and traditionalist
Well, and,
section
you know,
of
as
the
we were
Catholic
waiting
Church
for the moment
that
when
is
we will
also
meet the new
facing
pope for the first
internal
time,
divisions on these
it's-
matters.
It's just a moment of reflection.
So,
I think also of, as
we will
were talking before,
definitely
the
see
impact and what the
in
significance
just a few
means.
moments,
And I mean, just thinking about there will be
as
one country,
the
one group of people that are
Vatican
in the square thinking, "That's
prepares
someone
to
from my
announce to
country,"
the
or "That's
world,
someone
the
that I
eyes
can,
of
you
the
know, relate to
entire world
because
are
this is
set
the base someone
on
who is from
St. Peter's Basilica at
potentially
this
a
moment,
country
on the
that's being
St. Peter's
represented right now with the
Square,
flags waving.
with thousands of faithful from
Indeed.
all the
And
nationalities.
again,
We
the
see
process begins
flags
when,
from across the world,
The official announcement in Latin is made that we
waiting
have a new
for
pope,
Vatican authorities
and,
to
he
announce
appears
the
on
name
balcony, offers
of
his
the
own,
cardinal that has been selected, and
his own words.
also
Okay, we're going to go straight away here to Joe
the
Tulloch,
chosen
our
name
co-worker and colleague here in the square.
of the
Joe,
new
tell
pope,
us
the new
about
leader
what it's
of
like
the
down there in
Catholic
square.
Church.
You're there among the crowds.
This is
It's crazy.
a new leader. We've seen the white smoke come up, the Sistine Chapel, where the conclave, the 133 cardinals were locked in their second day of voting, in which they'll finally made a decision. Let's recall, just for context, for example, regarding the next few steps, last time a pope was elected, when Jorge Bergoglio became Pope Francis, his identity was revealed about 45 minutes after the white smoke appeared in the Sistine Chapel chimney.
How about yourself?
So it
Where
may
were
take a
you
few
when
minutes
that smoke started coming out?
for
because I think
the
many people
Vatican
were
to confirm
assuming
the
it would be a little
identity
later, when the smoke would come, whether
Let's
white or
recall
black.
that the whole process of the conclave is surrounded, and all the cardinals have sworn secrecy. The entirety of the process remains secret through and after the process. So the outside world at this moment has no information about how the voting went in terms of details, numbers, candidates. The only source of information is that traditional chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel with its black smoke and white smoke signal. The only information that we have is that there has been a pope elected, and from that moment, from the very moment that he is elected, he has assumed that position in the Catholic Church. What remains now is for Vatican authorities to come out the balcony that we're seeing right now in live images from the Vatican City and announce who's been selected as a pope.
Beautiful. And our camera work here, we were just zooming in on that balcony.
We'll go
where
through
the new Pope will appear.
some of the most
Tell us
important
about, I mean, you're
information
explaining
as
to
we
people in the
continue
square
to look
what's
at
next,
the images
what's gonna
from
happen when, I'm sure
St.
people are
Peter's
asking, so what
Square.
happens? The Pope's new elected.
We have signs of Habemus Papam in the square as people were gathered since yesterday. Really faithful have continued to come to the site since the passing of late Pope Francis, that was followed by one of the most important and largest funerals. Thousands and thousands came from all over the world to pay their respects to late Pope Francis, and afterwards they continued and they stayed to see what the verdict
And
is,
Joe, how about yourself?
who
You're gonna
will
be there for us, aren't
succeed,
you? You're going to be staying there in the square.
and definitely what will be the role and the position of the Church, what we can
Fantastic. You'll be
expect
telling all your friends
for the
about this
decades
experience
to
you're having
come.
here right now in the future,
One
I'm sure.
of the key
Well, thanks so much, Joe.
aspects to keep in mind in
Thank you,
terms
Joe.
of
We're going to be back with you very soon
whoever
for
has
more,
been chosen as a pope
update on all happening
is
in the
that
square there. So,
the
Monsignor
age
Vitale,
will
tell us a bit about,
definitely
this experience for you
determine
now. I mean,
if
this,
we're looking at
experiencing it live, the
a
smoke
long-lived
coming out here, and
papacy.
now our
So we may be
great
looking
sense of
into
anticipation for,
the beginning
next pope,
of
maybe?
the next
Well, it's
chapter
just
of
such
a maybe
to be here in Rome at this
decade
time,
or
but
two
also
decade long
I
period
felt
for the
closest to
Catholic
Pope
Church.
Francis because I've
Definitely a
served
leader
him
that
in
will have
different
to
ways,
deal
both,
with the most
as the,
important
in my
topics
work at Caritas
at a world
Internationalis
in
and
which
then also as the Secretary
many
General of the International Catholic
of
Migration
the
Commission. I always just say,
world
he's
crisis
the best guru
in
you could
terms
ever have,
of
to do public
humanitarian
relations
crisis,
on,
in terms
on,
of
migrants and
inequality,
refugees, and I don't have to pay
in
him a
terms
thing,
of
you know, so,
climate change.
and there were many times
Catholic
I was
Church
able to meet
has
him, and
taken
it was
a
so
very
beautiful
outspoken
experience each time.
position on
the
these
emotions
topics,
are more
especially
real than
since
they were other times
Pope
because
Francis
I
has
love
been
the popes,
leading it
but they
since
were
the year
strange to me. I didn't
2013.
know them so well. I met Pope John
And
Paul II a
whoever
couple times, but,
takes that
not as
role,
closely
whoever
as working with,
succeeds
Pope Francis.
our
It's
last
wonderful,
pope
it's exciting, and then
will
it's a real
determine the
privilege to be
way
here
in
at
which
Vatican Radio and
the
to
Catholic
been part
Church
of our smoke watching together.
positions itself
It's now
in
smoke
terms
warning, of course.
of these
So, and a severe
struggles.
smoke warning.
Exactly.
And white
Let's
smoke,
recall
that's
that the
more
Pope
severe, so to
acts
speak, but it's severe
and
good
is
news,
one
I guess I
of
should
the
say.
most important
I think it's
heads
gonna
of
be very
state
nice. I'm very happy
at
that I
the
was
world
here.
stage.
And just when I was walking out the door,
We can
I
recall
thought,
significant
I don't
moments
wanna be
in which
alone in this moment.
a pope has
This is a moment
intervened
of ecclesia.
to
This is the moment when
settle
people gather together.
geopolitical conflicts, wars.
I'm
Also,
so happy to be able to share this
relations
moment, and I love this
between,
view of the
for
square
example,
and
the
all of these
reapproachment
people
between
are
Cuba
gathering
and the United
together
States.
in really a tremendous tremendous sense of
significant
rejoicing. This
geopolitical
is
stages
after our 9 days of mourning
that have been
and shock
influenced
of Pope Francis.
by the presence of the Pope. So that is the relevance of the leadership that is being chosen today. We reiterate, we're looking at live images from St. Peter's Basilica. We are looking at a square that has been filled with people from all over the world as white smoke has come out from the Sistine Chapel, indicating that a new pope has been elected to lead the Catholic Church. And we are just only waiting to hear who of those cardinals that participated in this 133 cardinal conclave, who will become the new pope for the years to come. We were talking about the most important aspects that determine the decision of this election, and we were talking about the possibility of this new leader to intervene in world conflicts. We are looking at this moment at the election of what will possibly be one of the most influential voices in the years to come. And in that context, the characteristics of the person chosen for that position are of vital importance in terms of how the Catholic Church will position itself and in favor of which interests in this global scene. In this context, we've been following through experts some of the key debates regarding who could succeed Pope Francis. Among those key debates, we are talking about the discussion regarding the continuity or change regarding the reforms that Pope Francis had brought about to the Catholic Church. So we could talk about a more progressive sector of the Church, vowing for continuity in terms of the reforms that Pope Francis had brought about in 2013. Let's recall that when he was elected at that time, he wasn't among the main names until he brought to the table his vision for a church that had to be closer to the suffering of the people. A poor church for the poor was one of the symbols of Pope Francis' vision for the Catholic Church. Also, the importance of presenting a global South perspective, not only in terms of representation in the leadership of the Catholic Church, but also in terms of being the countries in the global South the ones closer to the humanitarian crisis that the capitalistic world in our current times is causing. So from those perspectives, through a papacy that was led by Pope Francis with reforms in terms of some traditionalist aspects of the Church, also a leadership marked by the idea of listening to those communities, listening to the needs of those peoples, and at the moment we are looking ahead to see among those who were chosen, what does that mean in terms of continuity of those reforms or changing back to more traditionalist positions. Let's recall that inside the Catholic Church there were also several discussions and also internal conflicts, and these progressive positions of Pope Francis were also heavily resisted by many sectors of the Church. Some of those sectors opposing the different positions that Pope Francis was carrying out. And among those sectors are some of the candidates, the possible candidates at least, that experts were signaling as possible cardinals to be elected in this instance. We need to recall that even though in every such instance, when a conclave is set to elect a new pope, as they have done so at this moment, even though we come in with a list of possible cardinals to be elected, usually written down by different experts, this doesn't mean that these are the only possible candidates. We are sometimes surprised by a name or a profile that much of the people did not know. And this has to do, again, with the secrecy of the process, a process that has been shaped in that way for centuries, and in this modern age was also reinforced in terms of the need to maintain that secrecy, to allow no external interference. We are looking at this moment at the Swiss Guard from the Vatican City. Let's recall, a new pope has been elected and thousands gathered at this moment at St. Peter's Basilica. They are all prepared and await a definite announcement from the Vatican. We already know the main news of today. A pope has been elected, a new leader of the Catholic Church has been elected. What thousands of faithful at St. Peter's Basilica is waiting at this moment is for the Vatican authorities to announce who is going to succeed late Pope Francis. So we were talking about the possible candidates, the possible names that experts had been signaling, which again may or may not have been the one that has been finally elected, but certainly point to the different sectors of a church that is disputing over what path will this key institution take in the years to come. A more progressive line following on the steps of Pope Francis, a church that focuses its main event and its main actions on listening to the poor of the world, or of listening to their needs, of advocating not only for peace but also for a more fair world order, for more justice and social perspective of the church. Also a more progressive approach to sectors that have been traditionally excluded from this traditional institution. For example, Pope Francis has over the years shown a more open approach towards the participation of women in church, towards the way that the institution views divorcees, also the LGBT community, which of course sustains their historic demands against an institution that has always discriminated the community. However, some more progressive sectors have extended ties of friendship and opening the doors, welcoming these sectors, these before excluded sectors, to be part of the Catholic community, with a perspective of the Church as an institution that needs to be close to every sector of society that is suffering. That was the perspective of the Catholic Church for the past years. And some of the possible candidates, experts were pointing at them as possible actors of continuity. There was a lot of mention of Luis Antonio Tagle, for example, from the Philippines, as another Pope Francis-like figure, very close to the people, very close to those who suffer, from a third world perspective, from a global south perspective. The importance that has been placed on a perspective that focuses on the struggles and the views of the global south has shaped the history and the path of the Catholic Church over the past years, of course, with the first Latin American Pope, that was Pope Francis. And many are thinking if this could be the moment for a Pope from Asia, for example. Another sector, another region of the world that has seen an increasing presence and growth of the Catholic Church has been Africa. And in that case, some experts were pointing out to possible cardinals from that continent to become a new pope, with a lot of tensions with the current leadership or the past leadership of Pope Francis, as some of the cardinals have also heavily opposed the reforms promoted by the last Pope, and have advocated for a return to traditionalism, to a return to firmer stances against the LGBTQ plus community, for example, a firmer stance against the participation of women in church, a return for the world to focus on a more theological perspective and further away from the social crisis of humanity. We are looking at the ceremony that is underway at St. Peter's Basilica at this moment. Let's recall that the most important news of today is that a new pope has been elected, that white smoke has come out of the Sistine Chapel, and that now the world awaits in St. Peter's Square and also all around the world. They await for the Vatican to identify who is that cardinal that today will no longer be cardinal, but will come out that balcony in St. Peter's Basilica as the new Pope, the new head of the Catholic Church. We are looking at a ceremony, a procession at St. Peter's Square. All of these are preparations. Let's recall that the entirety of the conclave, it's a heavily ceremonial conclave. Their tradition is in every detail of the entirety of the ceremony. One of the key aspects has to do with the secrecy of the conclave. So special devices have been put in place so that no news portal, no journalist has any information at this moment, and the entirety of the world will know not only the name of the new Pope in just a few minutes, but also the path that the Catholic Church will be taking when the Vatican authorities come out in the balcony, face the faithful that are gathered at St. Peter's Basilica, the Holy See, and announce which cardinal has been chosen to succeed late Pope Francis. We are looking at images from St. Peter's Basilica. At this moment, as the election has been made, and we have seen that white smoke come out. We've also heard from our special envoy, Jorge Gestoso, just moments ago during our live contacts with information about how the faithful were all awaiting for a result to come. But there was, of course, because of the nature of the process itself, no certainty regarding if this was going to be the case today, in the second day of the conclave. And finally, we've arrived to a decision. The conclave, the 133 cardinals who elected the Pope, have reached a consensus. Let's recall that they needed to obtain a 2/3 majority for the Pope to be elected. And against the opinions of some experts that said that this could take several days, we've seen white smoke come out on the second day of the conclave, and right now the world awaits to know the identity of that newly elected Pope. Once again, let's recall that the talks that lead to this moment, of course, among the cardinals, the importance and the debates regarding who could be elected at this moment do not start the minute that the conclave starts. So they did not start yesterday, but they started the moment that the late Pope Francis passed. We've seen and we've followed different meetings of the cardinals who were already at the Holy See and who started arriving to the Vatican City. To the Vatican City at that moment. And from that moment on, the cardinals have been debating on the needs of the church at that time, hearing from the different cardinals, some of them better known, some of them less known to his comrades. Each one of them have been giving their opinion on what they think that the church, the Catholic Church, needs at this moment of time. And also each one of them have possibly shown their views on what they need at this moment. And those meetings start shaping what are the possible consensus that then need to be reached. So we know that at least the cardinals had 4 voting stages, at least 4 voting stages, until they finally reached that 2/3 consensus. That means that 2/3 of the 133 cardinals needed to vote for one same name. It didn't happen at the first 3 instances. And that consensus needs time and conversation. We've seen how yesterday the conclave started with a ceremonial mass in which the cardinals also lay on praying and reflecting to help them, guide them in this decision. But there's a lot at stake here. It is one of the largest seats of power at the current world stage. It can determine the outcome, or at least influence, among the most relevant conflicts and crises in today's world. So there's a big debate and also power struggles that have to do with which sector of the church will end up leading this next stage. Let's understand that this happens in the framework of a changing world order in which many instances of what is happening around the map are pointing to a world order that is shifting its ways since, for example, the end of the Second World War and the world order imposed after that time, the international institutions created after that time. Many of those institutions are in crisis at this moment. Many of the world crises regarding climate change, inequality, world hunger, access to land or household, and an ongoing genocide about which late Pope Francis has repeatedly spoken against. In that context, in which many of the leading nations have also seen significant changes in terms of their leadership and leadership styles. The change of US administration, for example, has heavily impacted the world scene as a whole, with the new administration of President Donald Trump. Many nations across the world see a rise in far-right extremism, as other nations, specifically in the global south, are leaning on cooperation and solidarity and a new international fight against fascism. That is the world in which the leadership of maybe the most significant institution, religious institution in the world is also changing its leadership. So we come from a legacy that has marked a position, a very strong position in several points. Pope Francis was elected because of the views of change that he was bringing to an institution that was in open crisis regarding its relevance in the world, its internal conflicts, its internal scandals that went from corruption to sexual abuse cases within the Catholic Church. And it was Pope Francis' position to revitalize that institution, bring it closer to the people, specifically to the people of the Global South. Acknowledge many of those crises and try for a more coherent institution, maybe phrased in the idea of building a poor church for the poor. A very significant idea if we think that the Vatican had time and time again been signaled for the difference between the striking and rich traditions that marked the Vatican and its protocols, its heavily enriched protocols, with the peoples of the world that were following this church, sometimes in extreme poverty. It was one of Pope Francis' missions to try to close that gap by bringing that church closer to the poor of the world, closer to the margins of the world, closer to the problems of the Global South, for example. And of course, these reforms that were successful in many cases, specifically if we think about, for example, the popularity of the church, we've seen with the funeral of Pope Francis, one of the largest funerals with thousands and thousands being able to go and pay respects not only in St. Peter's Square, but also around the world. How that spirit influenced also people beyond the Catholic Church itself, social leaders, not only politicians, but those who were working with the people at different countries were also very much moved and felt a particular connection to the leadership of a pope that had put the people at the center. We need to, for example, think of the relevance from Latin America, the relevance of Pope Francis' mediation to lift the US blockade on Cuba, and how that impacted and helped the negotiation process. 2 times Pope Francis visited the island and marked a process which was one of the voices, most influential voices that spoke against the US blockade, as much as of the international community was also speaking against that criminal blockade on Cuba. That is just one of the examples in which the leader of the Catholic Church was able to intervene not only with the lives of the faithful, those who follow the Catholic Church, but really becoming an influential leader in changing the lives of people from across the world and across religions and beliefs. Pope Francis was also an important advocate for collaboration among the different religious beliefs, and a moment in which the escalation of tensions, the escalation of discrimination to comrades of different religious beliefs, for example, religious leaders from the Arab world, religious leaders from different nationalities. Pope Francis has made very significant efforts to talk about building a world in unity and in dialogue with different religious perspectives. A position that highlights the importance of collaboration, the importance of listening to different perspectives in a time in which other leaders are emerging, political leaders around the world are emerging as voices of division and confrontation and negative nationalism in terms of fostering discrimination. The Church during the last decade was one of the institutions that was heavily combating those positions and taking significant stances on key topics of the world. Immigration, for example, was signaled by Pope Francis time and time again as one of the most important and relevant humanitarian crisis that world leaders, specifically from northern countries, had to tend to with humanity. He was an enormous advocate for the human rights of migrants all over the world, seeing as how, for example, the Vatican City is at a place geographically directly linked to thousands of deaths from migrants that are trying to reach European soil and sometimes brutally left to die. He was very much sensitive to those sufferings, and he brought it up time and time again. One of his last bilateral meeting was with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, and experts signaled that the main topic of discussion was Pope Francis raising his concern and bringing to the table the need for the United States to tend to the human rights of migrants in the midst of the deportations that the Trump administration has been carrying out, with many denunciations of violations of human rights. From the very beginning of his leadership of the Catholic Church to the very end, migration was a central issue in which, with Pope Francis, the Catholic Church stood with a firm stance of defense of the human rights of every man, woman, and child, no matter its nationality, no matter its legal status. Now, this represents a very important and relevant stance, and also was very contested politically by the powers of the North that are taking a severe stance against migration. And as we were saying in the case of the United States, measures that have been time and time again denounced as outright against human rights. So many northern leaders, including leaders from more traditionalist and conservative and right-wing sectors of the Catholic Church, have opposed these views of Francis, placing the responsibility on the leadership of the northern powers to care for the human rights of every migrant. Many of them have even exposed views against migration or not opposed to the criminalization of migration, responding to interests that favor, for example, European powers, also the United States. So all of these world issues are at play at this moment in the election of the new Pope. So as we were saying, a new Pope was elected. We've seen the white smoke come out of the Sistine Chapel. The people and the world are awaiting. We see the images from St. Peter's Basilica, waiting for the Vatican to announce who was chosen. And in that name, in that decision of who will lead the Church, lies the answer to this debate that we were signaling. Lies the answer to what steps and what position will the Catholic Church, one of the most influential institutions of the world, take in regards to migration, climate change, the struggles of the global south, ongoing wars, the ongoing genocide in Palestine. We are looking at a church that has debated and has already made a decision on if it's going to continue the path of reforms that Pope Francis brought to the table, or if it's going to have a turn towards conservatism, traditionalism, and away from the demands of the global south. And as we're saying this, we're looking at a lot of flags that represent the presence of that global south there, as we see Mexico, Puerto Rico, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela. Latin America has always had a very significant majority Catholic population, of course, due to the influence of colonial times. But many of the peoples today have, even though they still conserve many of their own traditions, views, and perspectives, they remain profoundly Catholic. They have made that religion their own and have a very sincere connection to this institution, which is for that reason very influential in the region. And with the election of Pope Francis, had also become very influential in terms of intervening in the global scene. Let's recall also that the social organizations, many with being at the forefront of the Latin American struggle, had a very significant place at the table of Pope Francis. And that means it had a very significant place at the views and also the focus that the Catholic Church was taking on different stances. Pope Francis led several meetings, world meetings with social organizations, not just political parties, but social organizations in which social leaders were working with the most humble in the most unequal region of the world, that is Latin America, in the fight and in the struggle towards a fairer world order. Now we'll see with this new election, again, if those paths of reforms and of bringing that historical and traditional institution closer to the people, if that will be maintained, or if that path will shift towards a more conservative approach. Let's recall that among the main topics of debate inside the Church, there are several controversial topics, and the positions of each candidate, of each cardinal on those relevant topics also played an important part in their possible election. So we're talking about the presence of women in church, the attitude of the Church towards the LGBTQ plus community, also the attitude towards divorcees, but also internal scandals, as what positions needs the institution take in the face of corruption scandals, also in the face of denunciations of sexual abuse. The opinion of each cardinal on what path should that institution take to deal with this, with every topic in this matter, heavily represents the charisma and the character of the leadership to come. We've already stated Pope Francis has brought a lot of new views and reforms. He was also elected for those reasons, but he was also heavily resisted. And as he managed to implement several of those reforms, and he took controversial stances many times against the main powers of the Catholic Church itself, we are looking at an instance in which we'll see if the new election will finally give continuity to that legacy, or it will definitely change it. So we are at this moment joined by Pablo Malizia, journalist from Argentina. Thank you so much, Pablo, for joining us once again in teleSUR English. We are looking at a very significant moment as the St. Peter's Basilica is filled with people. We're awaiting to know the identity of the newly elected Pope. Pablo, what is your view on this? What is at stake here?
Well, I think that there are two important things we are about to know. Not only the identity of the Pope, but also it is very important that we pay attention on the name that he picks. Because we saw it with Pope Francis. It was a real statement. The thing he made when he chose precisely that name in memory of Saint Francis of Assisi. Okay, so I think both details are going to be very important. Number one, if the most progressive wing of the church is going to keep control of the Catholic Church, or if the more conservative part of the church, Opus Dei and others, are going to be in this political struggle to name the next leader of the Catholic faith. We remember that during the funerals, a number of presidents from around the world went to the last goodbye to Pope Francis, and a lot of them were not precisely the ones that loved him the best during his time. We saw not just Donald Trump and Meloni, all the right-wing presidents of the Western countries attended to that funeral, and it was not just by chance. It was not all even because they loved him. They went there because they wanted to put extra pressure to the cardinals in this votation in order to pull the election to the right part of the people of the candidates, let's say. So we are in this is a very important moment in history. We will see if the church is going to continue the legacy that Pope Francis started with all his reformations, all the changes, the openness that he gave to the Catholic Church. If this is going to be deeper, and as you were saying before very cleverly, if the church is going to stay side by side with the poor people of the world, if the church is going to be the voice of the excluded, of migrants, or if the church from now on is going to be once again let's say the way that the main powers of the planet will keep easy and calm to all that army of starving people around the planet in order to prevent revolution, let's say, to put it short. So these are we are in a point of history in which this is going to be very important for the future of the Catholic Church itself, because we have seen especially in Latin America, we have seen the growth that other churches had, Protestant churches and evangelistic churches that have grown mathematically, increased their power or their number of followers in Latin America, and at the same time the Catholic Church lost a lot of their people. So if church turns to the right with the new Pope,
Pablo, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're going live with the Vatican because they're doing the official announcement. Let's listen.
Tenemos Papa.
Eminentissimum,
Irreverendísimo Señor
Dominum
Roberto Francisco, Cardenal de la Santa Iglesia Romana, ma Prevost, que se impuso el nombre Leo XIV.
Dominum Robertum Franciscum, Sancte Romane Ecclesiae, Cardinalem Prevost. qui sibi nomen imposuit Leonem XIV.
Images from the St. Peter's Basilica as the Pope has been elected and announced. It's U.S. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost. Again, we reiterate this information as we are looking at images from St. Peter's Square and St. Peter's Basilica. The cardinals on the second day of the conclave have reached an election on the new Pope. And the new Pope of the Catholic Church has been chosen, Robert Francis Prevost, U.S. Cardinal. He will be the new leader of the Catholic Church. Breaking news from the Vatican City. We've been waiting for the past minutes since the white smoke indicated that the conclave had reached a decision, and we now know that the new Pope for the Catholic Church is U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost. This is the U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost, who, despite ideas that a pope from the U.S. were not on the table, that had been highlighted by many experts, but we had said that the lists of potential popes sometimes did not coincide with the final election. And we now see that despite expert analysis, the election of this new Pope has contradicted them once again. The Pope that has been elected to lead the Church on the years to come is U.S. citizen, Chicago-born Robert Francis Prevost. Some information on Prevost. He was created a cardinal by Francis in the year 2023. The former leader of the Augustinian order was also appointed by the late Pope to the powerful dicastery for bishops, which oversees the selection of new bishops from around the world. Those senior roles, combined with the fact that he has significant missionary experience in Peru, that is where he did a big part of his trajectory during missionary service in Latin America, in Peru. He also served as bishop of the northern city of Chiclayo there. And these are some of the qualities that characterize him in the election of U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost as the new Pope. We continue to reiterate the importance, the most important news of the day, and will also mark the years to come for the Catholic Church and also for the world, is that the Catholic Church has a new leader, has a new Pope, and that Pope is U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost. The name that Robert Prevost has chosen for his papacy is Pope Leo XIV. So we are looking at the beginning of a new stage for the Catholic Church. Pope Leo XIV has been elected successor of late Pope Francis. We were recalling some details from his biography. Created a cardinal by Francis only in 2023, a few years ago. Also appointed by the late Pope to the Dicastery for Bishops, which oversees the selection of new bishops from around the world, so a very influential role. He's also had experience doing missionary service in Peru, where he spent several years serving as bishop of the northern city of Chiclayo. Pope Leo XIV. An important detail, it's been a long time since we had a pope with the name Leo. Leo XIII was elected in the year 1878. Looking at the images of St. Peter's Basilica, St. Peter's Square, we have thousands of faithful, awaiting for the initial statements from the new Pope, the new leader, as we see him come out the balcony.
Here he is.
This is Pope Leo XIV,
Going up, the greeting, the waving.
U.S. Cardinal
Smiles.
Robert Francis
Amazing.
Prevost.
How amazing.
At this moment,
Dr. Liz was also talking about the
looking
the
at
symbolism of the red.
and
Is what
about
we know
to
is the
address,
sacrificial role,
greeting
and that is the symbol of the
St. Peter's
the cloth
Square
he's wearing right now.
for the first time.
And we see this beautiful
Let's recall,
close-up
we're
view
looking
from
at the
side
new
there,
Pope, the new leader
at the same level
of the
as
Catholic
lodge of
Church. The crowds are cheering and waving.
Pope Leo XIV.
We have a U.S. Pope.
Amazing. Smiling.
Smiling.
This
Yes,
is
You can see who
Leo
would be taken by the moment.
XIV,
And,
I think going
overcome
through
with
his
emotion.
mind,
Waving
the weight of
Yeah.
this
at the
responsibility.
crowds that have gathered for days. They have come
You can see
to
it on his
Rome,
face.
You can
Oh,
see it on his
absolutely.
face.
to the Vatican City,
Amazing.
since the passing of late Pope Francis.
And we're hearing the bands below, the mutual salute of the anthems, the hymns.
And
the
they've
Vatican
waited
and the,
for that
national
smoke,
anthem.
for that white smoke to come out of the chimney. It happened sooner than many expected on the second
And
day.
After this, now Pope Leo XIV.
We were waiting for the
he will give
official
a reading
announcement, and
of
now
his
at
first
this
apostolic
moment
blessing, the
we are
Urbi et
looking
Orbi,
at
the
live
city of the
images
whole
from the
world.
Vatican
So that
City
blessing extends
as
to
we
everyone
see
who is watching, everyone
newly
who is
elected
listening,
Pope
your family, wherever you are.
Leo
It's a great moment to
14th,
prepare ourselves for this first blessing.
U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost,
It's
waving
a lesson. You can
at the crowds,
just feel and see the emotion on his face.
Yeah.
and waiting to address those crowds
They're gathered in St. Peter's
that have
Square,
patiently
still
awaited
arriving.
for
We're
this
being told
moment.
from the avenues surrounding,
We've been saying it, we were
the Vatican there,
just
the
before
streets and the
covering this with our guest Pablo Malizia, and we were talking about
So just getting messages.
The
congratulations. God bless the
importance of this election in terms of continuity or change of Pope Francis' legacy, and particularly
Pope. Viva
Yeah.
Papa.
his closeness to the global south. Well, it remains to be seen in that context what it means for a U.S. cardinal to have been chosen as the new leader of the Catholic Church.
And we're all silent now, waiting his first words.
We reiterate this breaking news. U.S. Cardinal is now Pope
La
Francis.
pace
Let's listen.
sia con tutti voi. Fratelli, sorelle carissimi, questo è il primo saluto del Cristo risorto, il buon pastore che ha dato la vita per il gregge di Dio. Anch'io vorrei che questo saluto di pace entrasse nel vostro cuore, raggiungesse le vostre famiglie, a tutte le persone, ovunque siano, a tutti i popoli, a tutta la terra. La pace sia con voi.
Leo XIV is addressing the crowds for the first time at St. Peter's Square, greeting them, blessing them.
We're just hearing the first words of Pope Leo XIV as he continues.
Those
We'll
were the
provide a
first
summary here in
words
just a moment as
of
we listen
the
to
new
his
Pope,
words.
newly elected
He's
Pope,
asked everyone to
the first U.S. cardinal to be appointed as
This
Pope,
is the peace
and
of the risen Christ.
is now Leo
XIV.
XIV.
Peace that is disarming and humble and persevering.
Proviene da Dio.
It comes from
Dio
God.
che ci ama a tutti.
God who loves all of us
Incondizionalmente.
without any limits and conditions.
Ancora conserviamo nei nostri orecchi
And
quella voce debole ma sempre
we still have
coraggiosa
the
di
sound in
Papa
our ears of that,
Francesco,
the weak
che
voice of Pope
benediva
Francis,
Roma.
who was blessing Rome here. We have that fresh in our minds, in our hearts, in our ears, hearing his
Il
voice,
Papa che benediva Roma,
the Pope who was
dava
blessing
la sua
Rome,
benedizione al mondo
giving his blessing
intero
to the world
quella mattina del giorno di
on
Pasqua.
that morning, on that day of Easter Sunday.
Consentitemi di dar seguito a quella stessa benedizione.
Allow me to continue
Dio
that
ci vuole
same
bene.
blessing.
Dio vi ama tutti.
God loves
E il
everyone.
male non prevarrà.
Evil will not
Siamo
prevail.
tutti nelle mani di
We
Dio.
are all in the hands of God.
Pertanto, senza paura,
So without fear,
uniti,
united,
mano nella mano con Dio
hand in
e tra
hand,
di noi,
with God and among
andiamo
ourselves,
avanti.
we go forward.
Siamo discepoli di Cristo.
We are disciples of Christ.
Cristo ci precede.
Christ goes before us.
Il mondo ha bisogno della sua luce.
The world needs his light.
l'umanità necessita di lui come
Humanity
il ponte
needs
per
him.
essere raggiunta da Dio e dal suo amore.
But as the bridge between God and His love.
Aiutateci anche voi, poi gli uni gli altri, a costruire i ponti
May we all
con il
build
dialogo, con
bridges
l'incontro,
with dialogue and
unendoci
encounter,
tutti per essere un solo
so that we can
popolo,
all be
sempre in pace.
one people, all in peace.
Grazie a Papa Francesco.
Thank you, Pope Francis, for all you've done. We're hearing the first words here of Pope Leo XIV, just elected Pope.
Voglio ringraziare anche tutti i confratelli cardinali
I'd like to also
che
thank my
hanno
brother cardinals
scelto me
who chose
per essere
me to
successore di
be
Pietro
the successor
e
of Peter
camminare insieme a voi
and to
come Chiesa
walk
unita,
along with you,
cercando sempre la pace, la giustizia,
searching all together
cercando
for peace and
sempre
justice,
lavorare come uomini
and
e
working
donne
together,
fedeli a Gesù Cristo,
men and women faithful
senza
to Christ,
paura,
without
per
fear,
proclamare
to
il Vangelo,
to proclaim the
per
gospel,
essere missionari.
to be missionaries. Pope Leo offering these initial words, which we're just
Sono
translating on the fly here.
Un figlio di Sant'Agostino,
I'm a son of Saint
Agostiniano.
Augustine, and I'm an Augustinian
che ha detto: con voi sono cristiano
who
e
said,
per voi vescovo.
with
In
you I am a
questo
Christian,
senso
and for you
possiamo
I am a bishop.
tutti camminare
So
insieme
may we all
verso quella
walk
patria
together towards that,
la quale Dio ci ha preparato.
to the place where that God has prepared for us. May we walk
Alla
together, accompany each
Chiesa
other. To the Church
Di Roma,
of Rome,
un saluto speciale.
a special greeting. As Bishop of Rome, of course, a special greeting.
Dobbiamo cercare insieme come essere una
We've gotta
chiesa missionaria.
Look at how we can together be a
Una
missionary
chiesa che
church,
costruisce i ponti,
a church
di
that builds
dialogo,
bridges,
sempre aperta a ricevere,
that
come
is,
questa
that is always
piazza con
open
le braccia
to
aperte
receive
a tutti,
everyone,
tutti coloro
just
che
like
hanno
in this
bisogno
square, to receive
della
everyone,
nostra carità,
to welcome
la nostra
everyone,
presenza,
our
il
charity,
dialogo, l'amore.
our dialogue and love.
Y se me permiten también una palabra, un saludo
And now, a greeting in Spanish. Please allow me here
a
to
todos aquellos, y en modo particular a mi querida diócesis de Chiclayo en el Perú.
So to all of you, but especially to the people of my diocese of Chiclayo in Peru,
Donde un pueblo fiel ha acompañado a su obispo, ha compartido su fe y ha dado tanto para
where we
seguir
had such faithful
siendo
people
iglesia
accompanying
fiel de
the bishop,
Jesucristo.
and we had such faithful
A
people
tutti voi,
helping the
fratelli e
bishop.
sorelle di Roma, d'Italia, di tutto il mondo,
To all of you,
vogliamo essere
the
una
people of
chiesa
Rome and of Italy,
sinodale, una chiesa che cammina, una chiesa che
we need
cerca
to be
sempre
a synodal,
la
a
pace,
synodal church, a
cerca
church that's a
sempre la
pilgrim,
carità, cerca
that
sempre di
shows
essere
charity
vicino,
always,
specialmente a coloro che soffrono.
and especially is charitable to those who are suffering.
Oggi
Today,
il giorno della supplica alla Madonna di Pompei.
today is the day of praying to the
Nostra
Madonna
Madre
of
Maria
Pompeii.
vuole sempre camminare con noi, stare vicino,
Our Blessed Mother Mary
aiutarci
always
con
wants
la
to be
sua
close to
intercessione
us.
e il suo amore.
She always
Allora
wants
vorrei
to
pregare
intercede for
insieme a
us
voi.
through her love.
Preghiamo insieme
So
per questa nuova missione,
let us pray
però
together
per
for this
tutta
new
la
mission,
Chiesa, per
for
la pace
all of the
nel
church,
mondo.
for peace in the
Chiediamo
world,
questa grazia speciale.
that she will
Maria,
help us get
nostra
give us
Madre.
a special grace, our Mother.
Ave Maria, piena di grazia,
Hail Mary,
il
full of
Signore è con
grace,
te.
the Lord is with
Tu
you.
sei benedetta fra le donne,
You are blessed
e
among women,
benedetto è il frutto del tuo
and blessed
seno,
is the
Gesù.
fruit of your womb, Jesus.
Santa Maria,
Holy
Madre di
Mary,
Dio,
Mother of God,
prega per noi peccatori,
pray for us sinners,
adesso e nell'ora della
now and at the
nostra
hour of our
morte.
death.
Amen.
Amen.
Pope Leo XIV there.
Pope Leo XIV, very interesting. A few themes coming out already there from his first piece.
We're looking
Talking
at
about
the
peace.
first statements made by Pope Leo XIV, just addressed St. Peter's Square for the first time. He thanked Pope Francis for his legacy, and he also made and sent a specific message, in particular in Spanish, to his community, the community that he worked with in Peru. We had previously mentioned that one of his significant works as his trajectory that brought him here was his missionary service in the northern region of Peru, in Latin America. So he addressed the square in Spanish at that occasion, thanking that community that also accompanied him in a clear gesture towards the Latin American community that was gathered there and was received with cheers.
At work, wherever you are.
Those were the first statements. We continue to listen to the new Pope.
De quorum potestate auctoritate confidimus.
So
Ipsi intercedat pro nobis ad Dominum.
the holy apostles
Amen.
Peter and Paul,
Precibus et meritis Beate Mariae semper Virginis.
and we
Beati
also
Michaelis
pray to the
Arcangeli.
Blessed Mary,
Beati Ioannis Baptiste. Et
To
Sanctorum Apostolorum
Saint
Petri et Pauli et Omnium Sanctorum. Misereatur vestri omnipotens Deus. Et dimissis omnibus peccatis vestris. Perducat vos Iesus Christus ad vitam aeternam. Indulgentiam, absolutionem et remissionem omnium peccatorum vestrorum, spatium vere et fructuose penitentiae, cor semper penitens, et emendationem vitae, gratiam et consolationem Sancti Spiritus, et finalem perseverantiam in bonis operibus tribuat vobis omnipotens et misericors Dominus. Amen. Et benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et maniat semper.
And we just
We were looking at
heard the blessing there, received the blessing there of
Pope Leo XIV
to the world, to the city,
giving the Urbi et Orbi blessing to that
all of us and all of you.
St. Peter's Square. Let's recall that a blessing was also the last
And I found very touching.
gesture of Pope Francis on that Easter Sunday, his last appearance before that same square. And now we have his successor waving at the crowds, Pope Leo XIV, U.S. Cardinal, born in Chicago, and with an important trajectory doing missionary work in Peru, the northern region of Peru. He's been considered an experimented member of the Catholic Church. We were looking at talking about the importance of the question of maintaining, continuing, or changing the legacy of Pope Francis. Definitely this is something that will need to be seen in every gesture, in every action from this new Pope, specifically regarding his his closeness to the global south? Well, one of the first things that this Pope did was address the Peruvian community that accompanied him in Spanish with a message directed to them and through them to the entirety of the global south. Of course, this gesture comes in a wider relevant event, that is the election of a new pope that comes from one of the main Western powers. We were talking about the importance of late Pope Francis being the first Latin American president, and in this case we have the first U.S. Pope elected to succeed that first Latin American Pope. So with this we see newly elected Pope Leo XIV leave the balcony as thousands of faithful cheer him from that square. They've all been waiting for this moment. They had all prepared for long days and nights as that conclave debated, and in that second day we have seen a final result, and that is that U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost has been elected as the new Pope Leo XIV. We've seen him address the crowds as we see U.S. flag being waved at St. Peter's Square. There's been and there will be a lot of analysis to really understand what this means in terms of the position that the Catholic Church will play in the days, months, and years to come. We've been talking about how Pope Francis intervened, directly questioned the main Western powers on their positions on key topics, always advocating for a fairer world order. Well, we will need to see what the election of a U.S. Cardinal as Pope means in terms of how that shifts, if it shifts, the Catholic Church's position on topics such as migration. For example, we were saying one of the last topics to be brought to the table by Pope Francis, speaking to U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. What can we expect from a U.S. Pope in terms of bringing these topics to the U.S. administration? We've seen how, and we were talking about this with Argentinian journalist Pablo Malizia in an earlier connection, how Pope Francis' funeral was a key moment for power struggle worldwide. We've seen all or many of the world heads of states from left to right-wing positions, and their presence had to do with swaying the debate one way or the other, knowing how influential this position at the Holy See is. Well, weeks have gone by, and we finally have a decision from the conclave, from the 133 cardinals that participated in that conclave, and they've elected U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost to be the new Pope, now Leo XIV. He is, let's recall, the first US Pope in history. Although he, some news outlets are indicating, holds also Peruvian nationality from his missionary works that he did in Peru, specifically in a northern region of Peru. He was named cardinal by late Pope Francis on the year 2023 and was born in Chicago, United States, in 1955. Also ordered to the Dicastery of Bishops and President of the Pontificate Commission for Latin America. He entered the Order of St. Augustine in 1977, was ordained priest in 1982, obtained a PhD in canonic law in Rome, at recent declarations taken by Vatican official news outlet Vatican News, he had stated, "I continue to consider myself a missionary. My calling as every Christian is to be a missionary, to bring the gospel wherever I am." He worked for a long period of time in Peru, in missions and in the education and formation of other Augustinian aspirants. He was Chiclayo bishop of that community in northern Peru since the year 2015. Then in the year 2018, he took the charge as second vice president of the Episcopal Conference of Peru. He was also the apostolic administrator of Callao, designated by the Pope in the year 2020. He has had several different charges at different Vatican congregations and was ordained cardinal and prefect of the Bishop Dicastery, also by the late Pope. Many experts had mentioned beforehand, before this election, that the choosing of a U.S. cardinal as a pope was a controversial decision, of course, because of the influence, the political influence of their home country in international politics, and how that could intervene or change the leadership of the Holy See. Of course, we see a very significant profile in Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, work with an important presence in Latin America, in Peru, to see just how this plays, this first U.S. Pope, how would that leadership be in terms of maintaining or changing the legacy of late Pope Francis? Of course, there's going to be a lot of analysis in terms of how those works and that interaction with the local Peruvian church have been, will be during the hours and days to come, possibly analyzing how that relationship with Latin America, with other sectors of the Latin American society, with social organizations, how has that played? And that will be a key role to understand what kind of leadership we'll be looking at in terms of having a new U.S. Pope as new leader of the Catholic Church. We're looking at images from St. Peter's Basilica. We reiterate our breaking news, possibly one of the most important days of the year, maybe of the decade. We may be looking at decades-long leadership of Pope Leo XIV at this moment. Also, one of the factors that very much came into play at this moment in this election, we came from two relatively short terms of leadership for Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis as well. And in this case, because some of the cardinals were much younger, we could be looking at a very much longer leadership. That is why there was so much more at stake at the choosing of this Pope, and in this case, Pope Leo XIV, U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost was elected to lead the Catholic Church. At this moment, we go back to Pablo Malizia, Argentinian journalist. I'm sorry, Pablo, we had to cut because we had this breaking news information. We finally have the name, we have the identity, and you were saying this marks not only the identity of the Pope, but what role will the Church take? And we have a U.S. Pope. What do you think of this?
Yes, I think that this choice was in a way the one that was easier to take for them, because this cardinal from the United States, even if he was, let's say, one of the cardinals that Pope Francis has named to that rank, he was not pointed as one of the most progressists among the possibilities, and he's not the other side either. I mean, he's not conservative. He's not very in the papers. He's not so, let's say, so left-winged as Pope Francis used to be. He's more in the middle, but at the same time, it is very interesting because he's an Augustinian. The congregation he's from is also very important, and that tell us that he's a priest that went on missionary missions. If I may say, he has been all his life side by side with the poor people, the excluded people. I think that in that way he will honor the Pope Francis legacy. He has a lot of bondings with Latin America as well. His presence in Peru for such a long time. He even met Pope Francis here in Buenos Aires when Jorge Bergoglio was the cardinal of the city. So they have met before before Bergoglio was named Pope. So I think that this is let's say it's a let's say Solomonic decision. They picked a person from the United States, but at the same time with deep roots in Latin America, with a past that is closer to Francis' teachings and legacy. And I think that now what we have to see is, well, how the things develops as he starts his his realm, his I don't know how to say it.
Right, his leadership at church.
Work.
Right?
His work.
Pablo, it's so interesting what you were mentioning, this thing of thinking about the duality of being from the United States but with close ties with Latin America. We were also mentioning before, for example, that he made a gesture by speaking in Spanish to his Peruvian congregation at that initial speech. We've spoken so much about the legacy and the importance of Pope Francis being from Latin America, that definitely that was a calculated gesture of like symbolizing something. What I was thinking is, what can we expect from a pope that comes from the United States in terms of a head of state? He will have to hold bilateral meetings with Trump. We were saying the last meeting of Pope Francis was with J.D. Vance about migration, and he was very harsh on these topics. What do you think this means? Can a U.S. cardinal take such strong positions?
I think that, of course, we cannot predict the future.
Of course.
But I think that a pope from the United States can be let's say, the best dream that Trump could have had, or perhaps his worst nightmare. Pay attention, because the coin has two sides. Because if Pope Leo continues with Pope Francis' legacy and tries to and continues raising the voice for the migrants, for the excluded, etc. Well, being American, being from the United States, perhaps it will be more than a stone in the shoe for President Trump, because if it's good for one thing, it can be, let's say, a more powerful message if it turns out to be like Pope Francis. So being a U.S. citizen and Peruvian citizen as well, because he got his Peruvian citizenship as well. Well, I think that we might be in front of, let's say, a clever decision by the Vatican, because he has all the tools ready in the table. Pope Francis left everything prepared for the next pope to have all the options opened, and now what we have to see is what is the path that the new pope is going to take. The path is open for him to choose. Now it depends on his political decisions. And it also depends on let's not forget that the Vatican itself is going through economical crisis as well, and the U.S. Church is one of the wealthiest in the planet and one of the ones that sends the higher amount of donatives to the Vatican as well. So their money is always involved in politics, and this is also politics. So we can wait, perhaps we will see a pope trying to keep everybody happy at the first time. But if I pay attention to his own story and what I mentioned before, the fact that he's Augustinian, the congregation that he belongs to is a missionary congregation. They have been in all Latin America, most especially in Mexico and Peru, let's say the Pacific part of Latin America. but always close to the poor people and the excluded. So I think that, of course, a good bed of hope, let's say, if that is allowed in this subject, we can have a little hope that things may continue with the path that Francis shown during his time.
Excellent, Pablo. Really interesting to think. What a complex decision and what a complex moment. And of course, we will have hours and days to continue to analyze this election of a new pope. So thank you so much for joining us here in teleSUR English.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to have Pablo Malizia, Argentinian journalist, covering this breaking news of the new election. Pope Leo XIV is the new pope, new leader of the Catholic Church. We will continue bringing you all the information and all the analysis of what this means. Stay tuned with teleSUR English.